Hi all and welcome to this webinar this morning. So today we're going to be looking at unlocking full visibility and strengthening your cyber defenses with Cisco Cyber Vision. Cisco Cyber Vision provides organizations a deeper level of understanding of what industrial devices are on the network, what devices are communicating, as well as how and what data is being exchanged. Cyber Vision was designed to be leveraged across an organization, including operations, IT, OT, and security. My name is Adam Stiles. I'm a senior consultant from Forfusion, and I'll be your host today. At the end of the webinar, there'll be an opportunity for Q&A with Michael from Cisco, and details on how to submit the questions will be added to the chat. So moving on. Our agenda for today. So we're going to walk through the challenges of an OT network, how we can use cyber vision to provide asset and communications visibility, identify system changes, vulnerabilities, threats, as well as a brief talk about cyber vision integrations. At the end of the webinar, as mentioned, we'll have the Q&A session with Michael. So before we start, a few words about Forfusion. We're a Cisco Gold partner. We specialize in the delivery of tier 1 IT services through market-leading technologies and skilled, accredited professionals. We have an extremely large number of CCIEs, and we pride ourselves on our ideology method. So that's our assess, design, integrate, and operate, and it's how we approach all of our projects to make sure that we cover everything from start to finish in the same way, in a consistent way. So we additional things that we provide. So we've got our professional services department. We also provide comprehensive managed service offerings. So that could span multiple siloed or integrated technology pillars that leverages the same experts, and it serves as an extension to your team. So let's set the scene and talk about the challenges and trends we see in existing industrial networks today. So it's no secret that industrial networks have poor hygiene and inadequate security controls. So usually the OT networks have been developed and maintained as separate entities to the IT network. The OT networks generally feature older equipment and devices. You know, if they work, they work. Let's not turn them off because these things operate 24/7. We might see various versions of firmware, various versions of operating systems, different types of operating systems themselves, different levels of patching if they've ever been available, maybe not, and also lots of industrial protocols. So dependent on what devices we are, we'll see different protocols. OT networks tend to be flat layer 2 networks, and they tend not to be segmented. So they've grown over the years. So this is where it comes back to what I was saying, where we have these devices, they're on, we don't want to turn them off. So they've grown over the years. Let's just add to them because it works. We don't want to disrupt. So if we have a new production line, we just add to the existing network. It's not a redesign and let's do this, let's follow this procedure. So aware that some places may do that, but typically industry trends would say that this is what we're seeing. So there are typically separate support teams as well, and specializations in IT and OT networking equipment, but often we don't see those two things together. You either specialize on the IT side or the OT side. So the additional challenge with OT networks above IT networks is that they're just always on. So the manufacturer needs the network, and so the network has to be on for the manufacturing to run. It's a key revenue generator for the business, that manufacturing line. So there's this easy distinguish between IT and OT, that these are much more sensitive to any outages, any downtime, which means that any changes that you might need to do, it's going to be a lot more difficult to get these things planned in. So the maintenance windows are probably going to be more infrequent, which means that these updates to the operating systems, to the firmware, they don't happen as regularly as we would see in the IT network. So if you look at a large, flat, unsegmented networks with older devices and equipment on the network that aren't patched or updated regularly, so this means that these OT networks are not digitally resilient. So they're quick, they can, and they are at risk of falling victim to a cyber attack. That can cause unplanned outages to the production, to the revenue, and eventually impacts the bottom line of the business. So what we're seeing is that industries are accelerating their digitization. So to help with this, they deploy more IT technologies. Operations teams are looking for new ways to grow productivity and drive new and higher impact outcomes. So they're connecting many new devices which are communicating to systems and applications that can sit in the IT domain or even in the cloud. So this deeper integration between IT, cloud, and the OT networks is exposing industrial operations to cyber threats. The more connectivity we've got, the more reach into the environment we've got, the more risk we've got. On top of this, these assets are often managed by third parties. So you have a real specialization in a specific product. You have a skill set that allows you to, you might support this machine and only this machine. There's not generally a broad support service. So we have contractors, we have remote experts, and they need remote access in, ideally, to configure and maintain these items. So as a result of this, so we're seeing the shadow IT practice develop, where applications are being stood up that the IT or the OT teams don't necessarily know about. So this might put an organization at risk, because if we stand up our own app, it might be easier to do this, this, and this, but if we don't know about it, we can't protect against it. So, and we've seen that all over the world, governments are developing cybersecurity regulations to force industrial organizations to protect their operations and safeguard their critical infrastructure. So IT and security teams are now being tasked to help operations teams manage and secure their industrial OT networks to make them more digitally resilient. So what we're also seeing is that the IT and security teams are being asked by businesses to get more involved in looking after and building more reliable and secure OT networks. So what IT teams are then encountering across the factories is that the current OT network design has grown organically, which is what we mentioned before. It works, let's not turn it off, let's keep building onto it. So we don't have the opportunities that we might have in an IT network to do a redesign, follow best practices, for example. And each of these factories will have evolved differently. So they're unique in terms of its design. And that's what we mentioned here. Each factory can be a snowflake. No two are the same. So additionally, with each unique design in a factory, it means there's a local tribal knowledge of that environment and what's required to support and maintain that environment. So another challenge we're seeing is with an aging workforce, that tribal knowledge is leaving the business. So the as-is OT networks that the IT is learning about don't typically follow design best practices the IT is used to. And without that knowledge, they can't pick up on all the nuances in the design and the operation of this network itself. So this becomes a challenge for the IT and security teams. So the IT and security teams generally now have realized that a new design needs to be looked at. In a brownfield factory scenario, obviously this will be challenging to migrate to a new design, and it will take time and careful planning to undertake any migration. So this is obviously where we can help. But before we do that, let's have a look at some challenges that can be found. So we've talked about they used to be and typically are deployed with limited help from the IT teams. The op teams know how to build the industrial operations, but don't necessarily have cybersecurity and advanced network engineering skills. In parallel to this, IT security teams generally don't have the knowledge of the manufacturing operations, and the team might choose to use cybersecurity tools that don't support the protocols used in these OT environments. So driving change can be difficult. We've seen this across many verticals, and we've seen this for a long time, that driving that change can be difficult. You might have to account for an extremely large number of OT assets, multiple stakeholders, vendors, contractors, and the operational constraints preventing the disruption to the business itself. So as we alluded to on the previous slide, IT is getting more involved with OT. And it can be the initial engagement of these two teams so that it's not exactly smooth to start with. We've got two teams that are typically doing things very differently. And when they come together, there needs to be a clear process and methodology to make this successful. So we need the teams to get to know each other. We need them to start working together. Before we can really start to drive the change, there needs to be a familiarization of what one team does, what the other team does, and where the crossover can be. So there's also a challenge that most organizations don't have a comprehensive or up-to-date inventory of their industrial assets. So We might not know how many devices on the network, and we might not know how they're communicated. We do also see this in the IT environment, but it's more prevalent in the OT environment. We might not know what vulnerabilities there are in the OT equipment or what risk we're carrying with those vulnerable assets. So because there's limited visibility of these assets, there's usually a lack of network segmentation. We can't segment what we don't know about, and we can't effectively segment what flows we don't understand. So not only is there this lack of microsegmentation, but there's generally poor access control. Remote access, as mentioned before, it's becoming more and more important. It's expensive, it's time consuming to send vendors physically to site. We've done that for a number of years, but now remote access is becoming more and more important. So the problem with this is it's often done with an all or nothing approach. So it's you have access to this network, or you have access to this entire segment of the network. We need to start looking at this differently, and we're doing this at the minute really well in the IT world, which now we can do this in the OT world as well. And it's about zero trust. It's about application access. Let's access exactly what you need. You don't need access to the other items there. We can control that. We can provide the zero trust. We can provide the access. We can provide the segmentation that will stop you from moving laterally across an environment that you shouldn't move about there. So, you know, because these assets are quite old and they were designed without security in mind, they're also vulnerable to malware and malicious traffic. The zero trust approach, the segmentation approach, the visibility, these are all key in getting to the position here where we can start to tie down this traffic, and we can make this environment both more secure and as a result more efficient. So we mentioned on one of the first slides that they're typically flat layer 2 networks. So this makes lateral movement, side to side, machine to machine, device to device within the OT environment really easy. So if you find malware in the network, it'll be very easy for this to spread. So there's quite a long list of challenges. There are solutions, and we're going to talk about some of this in this webinar. But let's have a look what trends we're seeing in the manufacturing space before we do that. So manufacturers, you know, they're continuing to deal with macroeconomic issues like inflation. They're also a known targeted industry for hackers. So customers tell us that cybersecurity risks in OT are being recognized as a challenge now, and they're being raised up the chain, and they're being talked about in the right environments, in the right forums, with the right people. That is leading the OT environments to become key investment areas, and because it's getting more and more important and critical that they are secured. They are no longer these siloed networks that have no connections in and out of the environment itself. We're also seeing more automation, and that's helping because that's overcoming shortages of skilled workers. We mentioned before about an aging workforce. In some of these, some of these environments have been running for many, many years. They're using equipment that you can't purchase anymore, or using protocols that you might not see anymore. So we can automate some of these processes, which is helping the other engineering teams focus on the day-to-day activities of actually running that network or improving that network. So the core business objectives, though, in the operational side remain constant. So we want to improve quality, we want to reduce costs, increase efficiency, we want to expand to new markets and improve profitability. So technology is a key driver in these objectives. So technology investments are a critical means of achieving these business objectives. So let's talk a bit about Cyber Vision now. So Cyber Vision is a visibility tool. So we talked about the stages a moment ago of remote access, zero trust access, segmentation. They are all fantastic. We can't do any of those unless we know what's in the environment. We need to know what assets are there. We need to know what communication paths are there. The journey towards any zero trust or segmented design is knowing what's in the environment, and that is step one. So this is where Cyber Vision comes in. So I'm going to run over some terminology here. We'll go into some demos shortly. But first of all, let's talk about the sensors, the center and the global center. So the sensors are they're deployed at the edge of the industrial network, and they receive a copy of traffic, so they can perform deep packet inspection on those, and we can transfer them to the center. So these can be embedded into the network devices. The Cisco portfolio, which we'll cover shortly, does include this. So there's no more kit to deploy. The center is the central platform, so the brains that gathers the data from all the sensors. So this acts as the monitoring, detection, and management platform for the whole solution. So this can be deployed physically, virtually, and in cloud appliances. So we've got the sensors, and they fire data over to the center. The center is the brains. The center does the calculations. Depending on the size of the environment, we may also have a global center. So this is a third tier. So if we think about the old traditional network hierarchy, this is our top level global center, and this can talk to a group of centers. So depending on the size of the environment, the geographic separation of the environment, the compliance considerations of the environment, we may have sensors, multiple centers, and a global center. We can do this in many different ways to design this out. So if we move on to the next piece now, so this is just a graphical overview of this. So what Cyber Vision does is it leverages passive and active discovery mechanisms to identify the assets. So it helps identify the assets. We can see the traffic, we can see where it's coming from, we can see where it's going to. From that, we can identify characteristics, we can identify communication paths, and we can query devices to learn more information. So we get to see everything that's passing through that network. So we don't only see the north-south traffic, so the traffic that might come in and out of the OT network, we can see the traffic within the OT network as well, and that's key to sensor deployment. We can see here that there's 3 sites, site A, B, and C. We've got centers, we've got a global center, we've got sensors in different zones, in different areas. If we can't deploy a sensor, we do have an option to span traffic. We'd prefer to put the sensors in, but there are other options. You may or may not have the global center. So there's lots of different ways to deploy this, but embedded sensors see all the traffic. They're not blocked. There's no firewall in between. So we've missed 50% of the traffic because it's actually been dropped on the firewall before it's got to the sensors to consume that data. So Cyber Vision's at the heart of the Cisco's OT security solution. So it's specifically designed to ensure the full visibility into the industrial networks. It gives you precise information on the connected industrial assets because we can see them. We can talk about their security posture because we can understand the vulnerabilities, and we can pull in risk scores because we know what's there, we know what's talking, we know how they're talking, we know over what protocols they're talking, how much data they're sending. We're analyzing the traffic to find out this piece of information. We can baseline behaviors. Okay, on this day, my factory is working, not even working, it is secure, and this is how it should be, functioning correctly. We can then baseline this, we can pull any differences that we might see from those baselines. So we leverage a lot of data points here to calculate a risk score. The risk score tells you the risk of that asset, and there are also recommendations that this is what you can do, and these are the activities that can take place to reduce that risk score. Let's make it better. It helps that identification of the top, the riskiest devices. One of the challenges is when you've got so much information, you don't necessarily know where you want to start. So we can help by using the risk scoring to identify the critical assets and then work from there. So Cyber Vision, I mentioned this before, we can get the asset inventory. So there's a really detailed asset inventory. It's really detailed visibility into events. This provides value to both the operations and the IT security teams. So we do have out-of-the-box integrations. We do have integrations with Cisco ICE, Cisco XDR. There are third-party integrations. You can see on the left there, we've got secure analytics, secure firewall. So we can start to see this context coming into other platforms. ICE is a really key one here because ICE, we can provide access control, we can provide micro-segmentation policies. If we know what's in the OT network and we can leverage the data that we're pulling from the sensors from the center to say this device is connected to this port and we have these attributes, we can start to provide better policy based on we really know what's connected there. It takes the guesswork out of any of those activities. So the IT SOC is in a better position to support the OT network because we've got threat intelligence, we've got firewalling, we've got visibility into what's connected and what policies are being deployed. We can use XDR to correlate the threat intelligence. We can orchestrate remediation. So if we do see issues, we can fix them quicker and quicker and quicker. So just to mention about getting the visibility. So there are various SIEM systems. We've got Splunk, we've got QRadar. So these can be integrated into this as well. So we can extend that visibility along there. There's a rich API. So Cisco are really focusing on building their products now from API up. Let's make sure that the APIs there, we can leverage them. And we can use these APIs to pull the data into whatever platforms we might need. So moving on, I'm sure some of you have heard of Cisco validated designs. So these have been around for a long time now across a lot of different technology sets, but they're an end reference network blueprint model for deploying approved designs. So they simplify and lower the risk. This has been tested. This design has been tested with this environment, this product set, so we can be sure that they work. So these are really important to look through when planning any deployments and any designs into OT networks. They really do reduce the risk. So they've been thoroughly tested with a long list of use cases, and the testing is done in conjunction with partners and OT vendors. So this is not Cisco only. Pull in the different vendors across different architectures and do a long list of tests so we know that this works in this environment, and it takes the unknown out of some of these deployments. So the outcome there is a much higher confidence that the design will be successful when deployed. When we talked about this before on the previous slide, about 3 or 4 slides ago, where we had the sensors, the center and the global center, we were looking at the products and how we can pull in that data. So these are the products here. I mentioned that there are embedded sensors. So we can see that there's a long list of industrial Ethernet, industrial wireless devices. There's industrial cybersecurity devices as well. So these devices, we can have the inbuilt sensor, we can pull in the information, where we might not necessarily be able to do that, we can span the traffic. There is a number of different ways to get this data. And these devices, as you can see, these are specific products built for these environments. They are hardened, they are, enclosed in rugged casing, and they can pull this data through. On the right hand side, you can see just a quick view there of a sensor and Cyber Vision. Underneath, we talk about secure equipment access. We're not going to cover that today, but that is another key component. That is the remote access into the OT network. So I'm going to talk through a overview here. So if we start this one, we're going to do 2 of these. We're just going to do some overviews so that you've seen the dashboard and you're familiar with it before we move in any further into the demo. So if we start this one here, so when we first log into Cyber Vision, we're presented with this overview page. So these are the quick overview screens. So this gives us the operational overview at the top here, and you can see the security overview tab as well. So under operational overview, we can see the protocol distribution. We can see the quantity of activity seen for different protocols. So we see in this pie chart here, we can see ARP, RARP, LLDP, and more. Lots of protocols going on there. We can see a list of the critical events in here. So we see sensor disconnected, we can see their criticality, we can see the time they were generated, and we can also see presets. So these are configurable presets that we can place here to provide a quick view of the information. We can edit these, we can add whatever information we need. Whatever information is important to your business or your vertical, we can add here. So within the security overview page, we've got information about vulnerable devices. We've got devices by risk score, events by categories, we've got presets. So we've got a real clear, quick view here of what's going on in our environment. And as before, you can edit those presets. If we want to see information, let's say about these vulnerable devices here. So we can see that there's a number of vulnerable devices. We can start to click into this and drill down. So we can see these CVEs, we can see the vulnerability titles, we can see how many devices are affected, the CVSS score. This is what we talked about prioritizing this data. We can start to see straight away what's going on in this environment. And we come back to the quick overview screen here. We can see this, and we move back to the protocols. We looked at the vulnerabilities. This is just to show that you can actually start then to drill down into these other sections. So we can see here that HMI2 and PLC4 are communicating. We can see a tag, Ethernet IP, so these are automatically generated. We can add our own, but we might have people that are administering this system, or at least reviewing this system, that aren't necessarily entirely familiar with all of these protocols. So we can generate the tags, we can click in and see the activities. There's a view here where we can start to see the flows. So HMI2 and PLC4 are talking, and here are the flows that we can see between those devices. We can even click further down here and start to see, well, what content have we been exchanging? How many occurrences of that, and what were the values? Lots of information that we can gather here. Really impressive amount of data just at your fingertips. So if we move on from this one, we'll just finish off here, coming back to the dashboard, and we can start to see a quick overview of what's in there, what devices are in there, what tags are in there. So if we move on to the part 2 of the overview. In this one, we're going to look at the Explore menu. So we looked at the quick overview menu, now we're going to look at the Explore menu. So the first thing we see is the presets section. A preset is essentially a set of filters that contain information that a user is interested in. So there are some basic presets in here. There's some all data. There's some essential data. There's active discovery activities. These are built into the platform provided by Cisco. So if we click in, for example, to one of these, we'll get more information based on what that preset is covering. So let's look at the all data preset. So we can see that on the left, we're not actually filtering on anything at the minute because this is a preset. So we can start to drill down, we can include, we can exclude, we can group the assets, but this gives us a quick view of what's going on in the network. We can see lots of different menus relating to this. So we have a preset called dcloud plant. We can jump into that if we want to. We can create a new preset if we want to. So remember, a preset's just a group of things that you're interested in. And as you can see in the dcloud plant, we are filtering by certain things. We're excluding certain things, but we're also including other things. So we can really tie down and be really specific about what we want to see. This could be plant 1, plant 2, cell 1, cell 2. And we can start to really just focus on what we can see there. So we can see lots of different items in here. We can see the devices that we've got in the environment. We could also use the menu at the top to see various different things. We've got an activity list, what's going on in that environment, what's communicating. One that I really like is the map view. So we can see this now. We can visually represent what's going on, what we've got. So we can see communication here between cells. We can see communication within a cell or within a zone. So these devices are talking directly to each other, and we can click on these flows. So if we click on the flow, we can see the information. HMI1 is talking to PLC2. We can see an Ethernet IP tag, and we can dive into the flows as well. So we can see that these devices are communicating, what's going on there. And as before, you can really drill down and see what's happening within the classes here. So that was the map view there. So if we head back to the dashboard now, we can see on the left-hand side here, we have an active baseline. So a baseline is a snapshot of that network at a specific time. So remember before when we talked about, well, let's see what's going on in this network at this time. We know it's good. Anything that changes from this point out is different. So it's not the selected baseline. So if we look at our baseline in here, we can see that when this was taken, since this was taken, there are new activities, components. There are changed activity, changed components, and we can see on the left that we could start to drill into these. But if we look here, we can see something's changed here. This is new. So what's happened here? And if we know what this is, if this is acceptable, we could acknowledge this and say, yes, that's absolutely fine. That's the expected device, expected behavior. And we can include that then as part of our baseline. So that is a part of the baseline. We could also report these. If they're not expected, we could report them. We could take further action based on those. But this is a really quick way to be able to view what's going on. We can see this straight away in our environment. So just to recap, we have the presets. We can select these. We can set them up as we want. Plant 1, plant 2, plant 3, cell 1, 2, 3 example. So you can immediately jump into the data that's important to you. And we have the overview screen here that shows us straight away, okay, what's going on in this environment. We can drill down from here into the other sections. So asset and communication visibility. So before I move on, let's just quickly recap. We've talked about Cyber Vision. It's a visibility tool. So gives you visibility into your environment. What I just showed there is that quick overview was just, we've logged in and we can just see some stuff. So we can see some vulnerabilities. We can see some things that will be of interest to us. We can look at our presets. So all of that was within 30 seconds of logging in. We can click straight away and go into that information that's important to us. What we do with that is up to us, but it's there ready to see. We don't have to drill down and drill down and drill down to find what we're looking for. It's right in front of us and it's immediately visible. So let's start looking through some more scenarios here. So I'll give you another overview and then of the content we're going to use in this demonstration. And then after that, what we'll do is we'll start to change the data, or we might add more data. We might introduce something that shouldn't necessarily be there. So if we start here, we're immediately in the overview menu, and let's go to the explore menu. So you can see here there are some more presets. So we've got a utilities preset. So if we click into this, we can see the environment itself. We can see the tags. So if you're not a protocol expert, as mentioned, you can see straight away what's going on here. We can also modify the timescales. We can view more or less data depending on what's important to us. So, okay, well, we want to see something that's happened in the last day, week, month, we can start to see that. So we did this before. If we head to the map view, we can see that this environment's a bit more complex here, but we can see the same detailed information. We can aggregate the flows if we're just interested in what's talking between different zones, or we can see the individual flows here. So these flows are categorized as well. So if we click into relay 1, we see a lot of properties about this device. We can see the tags, we can see the risk score as well of 45 there. And if you notice at the bottom, there is an option here to click into the technical sheet. So this provides more information about that device. So we can start to see what it's running, where it is, what attributes are associated to this. And we can drill down here and we can then click on the risk score tab. So this is what I've mentioned before. This is guiding non-expert users to see what devices they should deal with first. And this can be our first step in managing this. So the higher the risk score, we want to bring this down. So we've got simple information here about how we can do that. Within the automation tab, then we've got variables, memory pointers, how they're being accessed, details of what's being done. So we can drill into this. And the activity section gives you a small mini map overview here of, we clicked on relay 1, so we can just see relay 1 specifically. What are we going and what are we interested in? So we can see that straight away. And as before, we can start to click into this, drill down into the flows to see what's talking. We can see the tags. So if we come back here, we can see that as before, there's a lot going on. So let's just zoom in here and click on this Windows 10 device in the management stations. So it's in the control center group. So an orange rectangle, this indicates that this device has some external comms we can see at the bottom here. So if we click on this external communications, we can see straight away that this device is talking out, where it's talking to, what it's talking on. And we have the same menus as before. We add the mini map and we can then start to drill down into the device list, for example, where we could come back and look at, okay, what devices do we have in this environment? So we've seen that there's some changes. We've seen that there's some external comms. What devices have we got? Let's have a quick view of the risk score. Let's have a quick view of the activities. So this has been set up so that it's just really easy to drive into this and get the information you need. So control center here, this other device that is being communicated with. Vulnerabilities, we saw this was the view that we from the quick explore page took us straight into the vulnerabilities. So we can see what devices might be affected by a certain CVE. We see information about the CVE, the CVSS score. We can filter on these as well. We can sort these to what's most important. This is a bit outside of the scope of what we're talking about here, but this is the Purdue model, which shows us the different levels that can operate in an OT. So we've got zones that talk to each other, talk via each other, and there are design best practices. We also have a monitor menu here as well that can show us straight away if something's changed in a baseline. So if we click on this baseline, this is what we saw before. It's just a quick way to get there. Let's have a quick look. Let's see what's changed. Let's see what's new within our baseline. So we can see that this Lantronix and Microsoft devices are new. What's going on here? And then if we look at the variables, these are new. This is what's happening. In our environment, we're having these writes to this Microsoft device over Modbus. Okay, so we can start to think, do we expect that? If we expect it, as mentioned, we can acknowledge it. If we don't, we can report it. And we can see here that we can start to drill down and see what's been going on, how many packets, how many bytes have been sent there. So lots of information, again, at your fingertips, and mentioned before that we could drill into this and we can acknowledge this if it's expected and report it if it's not expected. So we also here in the baseline have the map again, but within our baseline only showing specific things that are different. So we've got a red line, which is something new. We've got a hashed red line or a dotted red line, which is something changed. We can click into these and we can see the same level of information that we saw before. So this is really customizable to what you want to do with it. We've got many different views in this environment that we can use and to see the data that is of interest to us. Okay, so we had our baselines, we had our environment. So let's see what happens if we now generate some traffic. So I've generated some traffic on the back end that we have now consumed. We've got our sensors deployed. We've got our center consuming that data. So let's have a look what happens here. So the first thing to bear in mind is this new data or new devices, they won't be part of a group. We might have to group them because these might be new. So they might be outside of the scope of a current group, a current baseline. So let's start this one and let's see what happens here. So first thing we're going to do is go to explore, and then we're going to head to our presets. So we look at our all data preset first of all, and we head over to, we can see the devices there. We can see the 5 devices, 3 other components, lots of activities. We see the same stuff we saw before. So we've got the tags, we've got the risk score, but what I'm interested in here is the map. So we can see lots of devices now that are outside of any of our configured environments. So there's broadcast components, okay, but there's also these Siemens and VMware, Rockwell machines. So what we can do is we can select the assets and create a group. So if we manage the selection here, we create a group. So let's create this group and let's call it the webinar group, okay? We can select the impact. That is a configurable option that affects the risk scoring based on what's in there, what the criticality is, and we could just select whatever color we want to group these assets into. So these assets are now part of a group. So what this will do, it will put them all together, and when this screen refreshes, which we'll do in a moment, we will then start to see these sit within the group. So we could say, okay, well look, they're in part of this group. They should be talking to each other. We can also see the representation of the conduit between groups, so the webinar group and the broadcast group are talking. Because I picked the same color, I am going to change broadcast components, so we can just edit these to make them visually more appealing to us, so we can see everything we need to do. So as mentioned, we see the traffic, we see an aggregate of the traffic, and if we refresh this, broadcast components is now our nice orange. So we can see these. This is really, really nice visual representation of this. If we want to show all activities, we can do this. We can see the communication within and between, as we could before. We can click on them. But let's click on this device now. So we've got this Rockwell controller, and it has the green arrow that was pointing to it. So let's go into this variable option at the bottom here. So if we look at this device has one variable being communicating. We can see that there's a sync variable, an ENIT protocol, and it's being read by another device there. So we can see that straight away. This device is being read by this other device over this protocol, and this is what it's trying to do. So let's make sure we save this as a new preset. So let's call this webinar preset and have this saved. Now we've got a new preset, and the preset is a quick view into this environment. We can see this straight away then. You can add a description, you don't have to add a description. But if we save this webinar preset, when we go back to our export, we'll be able to see the presets in place, and we'll be able to jump into this as soon as we possibly can, and we can see straight away the data we need. What we do need to do is create the baseline. Remember, the baseline is a point in time. So I know what traffic's in this environment at the minute. I know it's okay. Let's create a baseline. This is expected at the minute. We want to work out what's going on, and we can go to our baseline. We can see this is what's included in the baseline. These are the devices. This is the flows. This is the expected behavior. So point in time snapshot of what we are seeing and what we should see, what we expect to see, and definitely excluding what we don't want to see. So we've got our baseline here. So we can see now the context has changed at the top. We're within our webinar baseline now. So we've got monitor, webinar baseline. And as before, we can jump into the components that make up part of our groups. So these have all been consumed into this baseline. We can see the activities, and we can jump into this really quickly, see that these two devices are talking, and find out any data we need here. You can see the components that make up this as well. So we can click into these if needed to see more information. So you do have a remarkable amount of information at your fingertips that we can use here. So if we head back to the map here, we can just see again, quick view, communications, we can see the new and changed. For the purpose of this, I'm going to update the interval here to be the 60 seconds. So we're going to, every 60 seconds, we're going to check for lots of things, and we're going to report on lots of things that I'm ticking now. So that is just for the purpose of the demo. You can obviously set this up in your own environment now. But what we want to do is to start firing some more data into this and see what happens then when we do that. So we've set up our webinar group. We've selected these assets. We've put them in the webinar group. We've given it a lovely pink color. We've changed the broadcast components to the orange. We then set up our baseline. So we've got a group, and we've got a baseline of that behavior in the group. So if we move on, bear with me one moment. So what we want to do now is we want to look at identifying the system changes. So we had that view a few moments ago where we could start to see things that were happening, and that was to set the scene of, well, that's what happens now. We've got lots of these new devices coming on board. Okay, well, let's put them in a preset. That's great. Let's baseline them. So let's for the purposes of this, let's say that's our new utilities environment, or that's our new cell. Okay, that's been deployed, that's working, that's functioning. What we can do now afterwards is look at this and identify what changes, identify if there are vulnerabilities, identify if there are threats in that environment. So if we move into this one now, so what is just as a setting the scene. So there is some new data that has been injected into the environment. So we've got the same environment as the previous video, but we've had some new data injected into the environment itself. So if we head straight to the Explore menu, we have our webinar preset. You can see there's a little number 4 that says things have changed. Some things have changed. What's going on? So if we look at this, we can see some new components. We can see some changed components. We can jump into the map as well. So we could see, okay, well, look, there's a new flow here or a changed flow here. So we can see changed components as well. So if you see the VMware, it's got the dotted red line around it. So that's a really nice way to see that straight away. And we can click into these as before and get as much information as is needed. So the tag, there's a new tag here, engineering station. So remember, automatically generated tag based on behavior that's been seen. So we can dive in, we can see exactly what that tag is. We can acknowledge that. We can remove that if needed. So these are there to help guide. So yeah, we can acknowledge, we can report, and then we can look at this further if we need to. So if we go now to events, we can see there are various events that have occurred under different security and severity levels. So if we look at critical events, we can immediately see our critical events. We can start looking into what's going on. Someone's rebooted the Cyber Vision sensor here, so we can start to really look at what's going on. We can filter this as well. We could look at high severity events. We can change the time scale. Let's look at a week there, for example, a month, a year. We can really start to go back here and see what's been going on in environment. Well, our environment was fine in May, but it's not fine in June. What's going on? What's changed in those times, and what events have we got? And as before, we could click into these and we can see information about the components and the flows and the data that has been sent. Why has this alert been generated? There's a stop CPU tag there. Should we be seeing that? There's this new engineering tag. Should we be seeing that? We could also report these to XDR. So this is outside of the scope of this video. We're not going to cover it here, but we can report this to XDR. And what that will do is it will generate a case in XDR to say this needs to be investigated, and we can start to pull data in from, we talked about integrations from these various platforms that we can start to drill down into. We can look at and we can try and work out what's going on here. What do we need to do? Is there anything we need to respond to? So to recap then, we've got some data and some components, and we've selected a preset. Now we've got some new components and events that have come in, and you can see those then. So they were displayed then. You could immediately see those. New, red line, change, dotted red line, a new component will have a solid red line. They're really nice, easy visual representations to see, and you can see them straight away. What I've done here as the next step is I've injected some malware into the environment. So got our group, got our baseline, we had some new stuff that happened. Now we've had some bad stuff that's happened. So let's dive into this one. So let's go to the events menu again. It's generally where we're going to start. Let's have a look at what's going on here. So now we can see there is a lot of signature-based detections that have happened here. So remember, I've injected some things that shouldn't be there into the environment. We can click into this straight away and see that there is an attempted administrative privilege gain on these devices. So straight away, you can dive into that. You can see information of it. You can download relevant data, and you can see what the message was there for the code execution attempt. If we look into the Explore menu now, we can see all data here. We click in all data. Remember, all data is unfiltered, so we're just using this as an example of showing what's going on in the environment. If we click up here and we head to the map view, you're going to see that a lot has occurred. So that is a nice representation there that maybe something that shouldn't be happening is happening because of what's going on here. That has changed a huge amount, and we can click into these as before. We can drill down and we can look at the activities that are in place. So straight away you can see, okay, well, something's happened, whether or not it should or shouldn't happen. Webinar preset as before at 70 activities now, so lots and lots going on. And we're in the scope of our webinar baseline now, so we can really start to see, hang on a minute, what's happened? Why has this happened? We've got a visual view of it, and we can do with that information what we need. And as before, we can jump into the map view. This doesn't look great for the environment, does it? So we could see straight away, well, there has been an extraordinarily a high number of changed and new events and items. Is there something in that environment that shouldn't be in there? As before, we can use the operational and the security overviews as well. So this just gives us that quick view where we can, we can drill down into these as much as we want, but that gives that quick view. As soon as we open the Cyber Vision center, we can see this straight away. We log into the GUI. This is the information we're presented with, so we can see what's happening in this environment. So we set up our group because we had some new data. That new data was expected, so we set up a group. We then saw new data come in. We didn't do anything with it, but we could see it. We could have acknowledged it. We could have rejected it. So we could have added it to our group. We created a baseline so we know what's going on in the environment. And now we fired some things that shouldn't be in there into the environment. So remember, Cyber Vision is a visibility tool. So what we're using this for is to see what's happening. So we can see straight away, not only here, but we can see it in the event screen, we can see it in the monitor screen. Something's happened here that you need to investigate. And we can use, we can use integrations and other tools to really start to remediate this, but this will give us all of that information that we need to start that process. So let's have a quick talk about integrations then. So I've mentioned this before on one of the other slides, but if I talk about ICE briefly, so ICE is a critical key part of a zero trust infrastructure, the Cisco zero trust solution. So we can use ICE to get detailed profiles of the industrial devices. So we can understand industrial processes, and we can create groups of devices from that because of the information that Cyber Vision is providing to ICE that we can leverage to create policies based on a zone or a device type or whatever criteria or attribute we want to do this on, we can do it. So we can use the ICE to create these policies and deploy these policies, these IoT devices, the network devices themselves, the switches, the wireless devices, we can enforce the policies on those. So we can start to say, if you're connected to this this port, so you're vendor A and you are a controller, you've got another vendor A controller here. Yes, they're the same manufacturer, they're the same device type, they're on the same network. Should they talk? No. If there's no, then we can filter that down. We can segment that. Typically in these environments, they would have just been able to talk. So if something happens to one of them, we can talk to the other, but we can really start to bring this access control now to the port closest to the device that connects, which is generally the access port or the wireless device. So everything in and out of those of the network, we can start to see and control. Because ICE uses profiling, that's a dynamic process as well. If we unplug our controller from vendor A and we plug it into another switch, we can then dynamically profile that device and say, well, that's just the same controller, but it's now on this different device. Let's apply that policy to it. So it's not a case of static policy. And as you can see at the bottom here, we can have the ICE policy matrix that says cell 1 can do this, cell 2 can do this, your PLC or your MES systems can do this. So we can start to drill down, and what's really key here is that we don't need to know the IP addresses. It's totally IP agnostic. So we don't need to say IP, 1.2.3.4 can talk to 5, 6, 7, 8. We don't need to do that anymore. We can start to really drill down and say, well, this device type can talk to this device type. I don't care what their IP address is necessarily. I just care that these communications can be controlled. So this is a really key part of the data that we can get. We can pull this out of Cyber Vision and get this data into ICE, which will help us then create and build these policies. We can also integrate with Splunk. So lots of information obviously around the Splunk acquisition, closing, but it's a wonderful tool. So we can start to build a view, custom view, dashboards. We can investigate our assets. We can start to see all this information in Splunk. So that helps us investigate what's going on. Let's pull all of this. Let's pull the information about the events, the vulnerabilities, the asset information. We can pull this from IT, we can pull this from OT, and we can start to get that real big overview of what's happening in our environment. So Cisco trying to unify these platforms. So unify the investigation with Splunk and XDR. So if we combine these tools, you can see here we've got network analytics, endpoint, ICE, secure equipment access, Cyber Vision, so on and so forth. So these can all feed in. We can send telemetry into Splunk. We can start to integrate XDR for threat investigations and responses. But if with the more information we're feeding into this, the better we're going to be able to respond and the better view we're going to have our environment. And these are all open to integrate with these products. We also get threat intelligence. So there's Talos, which is the largest non-governmental threat organization that we can pull their information and their knowledge from. They see billions of events every day that we can leverage to protect our environment. Or something's happening over here, but how does that affect us over here? Do we need to protect this environment? So just before we move on to the Q&A, I just wanted to talk about us, Forfusion. So there's I mean, I am a little bit biased, I will admit, because I do work for Forfusion, but there are a lot of things we can do, and there are a lot of things we can help with. And I'll let you read through all of this. I'm not going to go through all of this, but something that I think is really key is we are trusted by Cisco. We work extraordinarily close with Cisco to help design, deploy, integrate, operate Cisco solutions. And we pride ourselves on the way we do it. We assess, design, integrate, operate all our environments to make sure that everyone gets the same consistent experience. So we do a lot of work for the public and the private sector, and we are trusted and cleared by central government as well. So we understand security concerns, we understand compliance concerns. There's lots of things that we've not only seen in one environment, but we've seen in really different environments. It might be a air-gapped environment, it might be a public environment, it might be a cloud environment. There's lots of different things we've seen. So we can use that collection of knowledge then to best serve any and all of our customers. So moving on now, we're going to have a short Q&A session. So I don't know if I can hand over to you in the back there, Andy, if there's any questions come in.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions. One of them is related to how is Cyber Vision licensed? And there's a related question to that, which is, do you offer a demo trial license as well? So kind of two questions that are related there.
Thanks, Andy. No, I'm happy to answer that. Hi everyone, I'm Michael O'Malley. I'm one of the solution engineers here at Cisco. As for Cyber Vision, when it comes to licensing, there is no license for the center, so the server and the visualization itself, or the sensors that run inside of the switches. All the licensing is based on is a number of assets which are discovered inside of your network. And then we have different tiers. So we also have the Essentials, the Advantage, and then one for IDS rules and so on. When it comes to trial licenses, the good thing is that with every install, when you download the OVA from Cisco, you get a fully fledged 90-day license. So it's a great start to do a small audit, you know, as Adam mentioned, around inputting packet captures and so on into the tool, so you can get good look and feel and even understand how many licenses you'd look to consume. As Adam mentioned there as well about dCloud, dCloud is always there for our customers to be able to use. So please, you know, sign up and get a trial running with that, and we can help you with that.
That's great. There's one other question. What sectors are best supported by Cyber Vision? Obviously, we've mentioned manufacturing, but it's applicable to many different verticals as well, guys.
Yeah, that's right. So it's anywhere really that's running an industrial protocol, so to speak. Again, Adam showed the demo of different protocols speaking between different devices. We're able to decode them. But one thing that we always get asked, which is kind of supplementary to this, is would it work in the IT space? It would, but it isn't best suited to there. Given the amount of traffic that we will be seeing from an IT network, it would very quickly overwhelm the servers. And obviously we have IT tools which are there for that. So as well as manufacturing, you know, we do a lot in obviously industrial, oil and gas, and even logistics and warehousing, where there is still a lot of industrial protocols being spoken.
And the last one I can see here is the data encrypted at rest and target?
Yep, so yes to both of them. The good thing about Cyber Vision, and if we think of the tiered model that we have, also we collect data at the edge. So obviously we don't decrypt the encrypted data that's been received. That's all an industrial protocol that we're receiving. But from the sensor itself all the way up to the center, it's all done over a secure link. So there's no way of tapping into this and being able to abstract the data. And the same goes as well when we store the data inside of the Cyber Vision center. All of this is stored securely inside of a database there.
That's it, unless anyone else has got any questions. I know we'll be sending out the recording, so if anyone has got any further questions, feel free to reach out to the team. I'll just pass back to Adam and Michael just to close off.
All right, thanks guys, appreciate that, and thank you everyone for sending your questions in. Some really good questions there, so keep them coming, and as Andy mentioned, we will be sending this out. So Just to close us off, Michael mentioned demo licenses available, dcloud available, brilliant. You know, to be able to use that and deploy that and test and play around with it. What we can offer you, zero commitment, one-on-one personalized demo. So we could personalize that to your environment. We can look at pretend data. We could look at some of your real data to see what's happening. Obviously, these are insecure environments, so we can deploy this in your environment, look at your data, and help you understand there. So always happy to talk to you. There's a QR code there that you can scan for more information, but just generally want to say thank you for listening. Appreciate all of your time, and to the panelists, thank you for being here today.